Good morning, everyone. I guess it's afternoon, isn't it? Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get the program started this afternoon. My name is Richard Potter. I'm Director of Kansas State University's Office of Corporate Engagement, and I want to welcome you to Session 4 of the Working with Industry Boot Camp. Today we're going to talk about managing expectations and the relationship. We have a panel of faculty members from K-State, as well as a special guest, Wendy Elliott from Zoetis, who I will introduce later. But successfully sponsored research projects do often lead to more and larger sponsored projects, and the key is really to agree on the expectations up front. So our initial speaker and then our panelists will address that and offer some tips to help ensure that your sponsored projects lead to sustained corporate partnerships that benefit you, benefit your students, benefit the corporation, and benefit Kansas State University. But prior to our guest speaker and panelists, we are going to bring Paul Lowe back to the podium. Paul is the Assistant Vice President for Research and Director of PreAward Services for Kansas State. He's going to share with us some information on contractual considerations such as timelines, reporting, payments, publication requirements, confidentiality provisions, data stewardship, and so on and so forth. So, Paul, without further ado, I will hand the microphone and the clicker over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the discussion this afternoon. I get all of the fun stuff to talk about. So as Richard indicated, I'm going to stir things up a little bit with some of those issues that appear in an industry-university collaboration that require due consideration and careful management, especially when the goal is to nurture relationships and to take the relationship one step further where we might be able to develop a strategic partnership. One and done projects are fine, but this again, we have a larger target that really focuses on sustaining a relationship, and to do that, we need to be cognizant of some of those expectations that a university and industry will have around some of these topical issues. We're going to start with timelines. As we move into our discussion about timelines, I'm going to pop up this UIDP slide that was presented earlier in the boot camp series that really focused on the differences in culture between universities and industries. And obviously during that session it was identified that that there are several differences that must be bridged to ensure a successful collaboration. And when we first glance at these as how can these two types of organizations even work together given these different perspectives? But over the years there's been great successes, great success stories, and universities and industry partners have been able to figure this out. And as we look at the issues that I'm going to touch on, there's many more issues than we have time today, but I just picked out some of the hot button issues, and that is a calendar reconciliation. When you're looking at establishing the timelines for your project, we've got to balance that academic calendar with the corporate calendar year, which a lot of times might be the calendar year versus the academic year. So we've got to balance that and be realistic and transparent when we talk about timely completion of the project. Earlier in the boot camp, and you probably have heard, this was mentioned several times. You wanted to under-promise and over-deliver. timelines is one of those areas in which this can happen. As you work to establish your project timelines, we need to be realistic. And that is, if you can't, with your given schedule, if you can't start a project effort until the summer, the sponsor wants to know that. And so if we start this at January 1, you don't have project personnel on staff, we're going to have to recruit. They need to know that. And so opening the communication line and being transparent is very important. The sponsors are, they should be pushing back. They have to answer to their management when they commit funds out of their research portfolio, and they also have to answer to their stakeholders. And so as you consider their time constraints, we need to kind of do a reconciliation of the elasticity of your ability to be flexible. Can you move things around? Is there an opportunity to reschedule some of your other obligations? When we're establishing these timelines, we will need to anticipate some of the potential hurdles, such as unforeseen contingencies. We've had an example of that. If you have a new experimental protocol that you're going to deploy for this particular project, just like an NIH proposal, sometimes they'll ask, can anticipate some of the research hurdles that you might face at the decision points. How will you address those hurdles to ensure that the project keeps moving, or we have a stop and regroup and change of direction if necessary? So I think if you anticipate that there's a potential for these hurdles, clearly communicate those with your counterpart or your technical contact within the company, so we can plan around those. Of course, there's always delays in recruiting a project staff. So I think companies are pretty much aware of that. But in this case, we'd want to clearly communicate, I'm going to have to bring in some additional project staff, and so there will be delays in the recruitment process. And be prepared to consider our sponsors' deadlines based on their budget year. This is probably a worst case scenario. We had a recent situation where a company had some end of year money in their research portfolio, and they approached one of our faculty members and proposed a project. Well, the project was something they were interested in, but it was a 1.5-year project. And part of that discussion, there was not a clear communication that that project needed to be completed within the current calendar year. Funds expended, deliverables received, and the company said that's part of that was part of their policy and for that particular research portfolio, and so we had to regroup to a 1.5-year project with only 9 months left in the calendar year created a problem. So clearly communicate both ways. The company and our faculty need to be clearly communicating these expectations. Time extensions become a problem, as our previous industry speaker mentioned. Not meeting the project deadlines or milestones can also create problems for the technical representatives at the company, especially if they're required to report progress to management. Our previous speaker indicated that that could affect their technical folks receiving merit bonuses, because their projects are behind. Don't know if that's the case in every company, but we'll defer, to the company perspective that'll be presented earlier. So delays do create problems for our sponsors. Next, as we look at reporting requirements, these become an expectation and a problem if reports are delayed and there has not been any communication regarding that delay. As we negotiate agreements, we try to apply the test of reasonableness with due consideration given to the sponsor needs. And what I'm referring to there is we've had sponsors that really need to be highly involved. We said, okay, we'll have a teleconference call every 2 weeks and a written progress report every month. And so that seems like quite a bit of burden, but it may be required for the project task at hand. So again, those are something we need to be reasonable about it, and also consider the sponsor needs in regards to those reporting requirements. Those reporting requirements will be either part of the contract terms or be a part of the scope of work, and will be considered deliverables. And and later on, a couple bullet points down, those deliverables there's usually language in the contract where the sponsor would own those deliverables. Reports can be specified as a milestone event. And so that's fine, and there's usually dates associated with that. But if you don't meet that milestone, then we've got some issues we need to deal with the sponsor. Sometimes on milestone based deliverable schedules, there may be payments associated with that. We're going to talk about payments in a little bit, but you can consider or realize the issue if we don't meet a milestone, we don't get paid. And that becomes important, especially on the final payment, in which there could be delays if that report isn't forthcoming in a timely manner. We need to proactively communicate if we anticipate a delay in meeting one of those reporting deadlines. I'm not involved with the projects, but I seem to get a lot of emails when there's a report that was not filed. And so I pass those on and try to open up the communication lines. But what I've found is that the sponsor is understanding. They just need to know, if a report doesn't make it. They don't appreciate saying, okay, it's been 2 weeks, a month since that report was due. Why have I not received it? And so just being proactive and keeping that communication lines helps manage the expectations and nurture that relationship. Another issue we see in the contracts is that the sponsor, the contract may dictate a sponsor format for the reporting, or it may mention that it's an investigator-initiated format. It's an extremely good idea to work this out in advance. So we have to reconcile this to contract language. Can you imagine the contract term? Final payment will be made upon approval of the final report by the sponsor. So if you've not worked out the format, then there can be some issues there in reconciling the difference. Again, getting these things worked up front, it causes some frustrations. Look, I just signed the contract so I can get the work started. This is part of the process, is just trying to work these out where there's not, any surprises or misunderstandings later on. In regards to payments, the payment structure can take a lot of different formats, but they also require a lot of consideration. And it's based on the standard operating procedures of both parties. So we will consider the cash flow issues for some of the smaller industry sponsors, but this also applies to the larger corporations that might have a robust funding portfolio. And so we will look at that. We'll also look at just standard policies, the risk adverseness, and also previous payment performance history. That performance history is on us. We've had sponsors tell us we've had issues before in getting timely reports, so we want to hold back payments, and there'll be a little bit tougher discussions in regards to getting favorable terms there. We can set it up on a payment schedule. This is a little bit riskier in some cases because they'll be based on tasks or milestones. So if you don't complete a task, you don't complete a milestone, you don't get paid. Worst case scenario, we had a deliverable as part of in a milestone schedule. The milestone did not get completed. The payment was not made. That final payment was around $100,000. The company dissolved. So they had a successor company that located in another country that we were actually, they came to the plate. They understood that this was a obligation that should be paid. They wanted to continue our relationship. So we finally got the payment. It took some late phone calls with the time difference. But in that case, it was a company that really didn't understand, well, look, that was a deliverable. That was a milestone. There was it wasn't a successful project, but what I tried to explain to them, or did explain to them, was you cannot guarantee the outcomes of research and development. They looked at that deliverable as being, I paid for that, I procured that deliverable, you didn't deliver, I'm not paying. And so those are things we need to be careful with as we set up these contract relationships. Payments can be made on specified payment dates that are evenly spread, so we usually like to get a payment in advance, and then the rest of the payments could be on a quarterly basis or whatever works there. Lump sums, we receive a certain dollar amount upon execution of the agreement, and then final payment within 30 days of the receipt of the final report. Again, we try to avoid the word approval there. We may have some companies that need to wrestle with us a little bit on that, but we try to negotiate that, if we agree upon the format, let's not tie payment to some sort of subjective approval process. For our foreign collaborators, these payments should be made in U.S. dollars, especially if it's on a payment schedule that anticipates payments well into the future. As we watch the currency rates, with our foreign collaborators, they're just all over the board. So we've actually had some issues with payments for long-running projects when the dollar didn't fare so well. So it actually ended up running us short in what our anticipated budget was. So we tried to negotiate U.S. dollars. It was a deal breaker in this case. The foreign collaborator said, we're going to pay in euros, take it or leave it. So publication requirements, very important aspect of managing expectations and balancing and nurturing the relationship. As we've mentioned in earlier boot camps, the university's perspective is we must maintain the freedom to publish. A company needs to pursue and needs to promote the need for confidentiality to preserve their place in the marketplace. I'm going to go through this example of some problematic language. This was an actual contract term that arrived in one of our contracts. It said the university will not publish, so it already sets up the wrong impression. But it gets better, but then it gets worse. It will not publish or otherwise release either to the public or any third party any information resulting from the project except in accordance with the following procedures. And here it's saying that prior to publication or release, we'll submit the proposed release in writing to XYZ Corp for their approval. So here we are granting a third-party veto rights over your rights to freely pursue your academic and scholarship. We'll be free to publish only after XYZ has reviewed it and has not weighed any objections. So you can say this is really a one-sided. Then Part B gets really interesting. XYZ will have no right to object to the proposed publication or release except for reasons relating to the inclusion of technical information. So what's left to publish, right? And so you notice that this is important, and we in the contract world understand this, and you all would know as well. We have a term that's capitalized there, technical information, and so that begs to go looking in the contract for definitions. This particular definition of technical information included results. So not much of a publication clause, is it? So what we had to do is soften this language, and we really changed technical information to be sponsor-owned technical information that was disclosed as, and identified as confidential information. Okay, so those are just easy conversations to have, but this company had not worked with universities and really wasn't interested in preserving our faculty members' rights to scholarship. That wasn't their main goal. So when I say we negotiate with companies, a lot of the companies that work with the university that have not previously worked with the university, it's more education than negotiation. Usually we can explain and come to a deal fairly fast. Bottom line is we must preserve publication rights, the primary component of K-State's public mission. I mentioned in earlier boot camp that IRS issues pop in there, and that's one of the main litmus tests for evaluating whether the university is pursuing its public mission. Publication is right up there at the top as one of the main public policy mandates. Preserving our rights to publish helps us on the export control side of things because then we're allowed to claim the fundamental research exemption. And what that means is that cuts the bureaucracy in getting the project initiated substantially. You will not then be required to do a technology export control plan. You won't be restricted from using foreign nationals on your project if we're able to preserve that fundamental research exemption. And most importantly, publication is obviously a main component of your scholarship. As we mentioned earlier with that problematic language, granting external veto rights over your ability to freely publish must be avoided. And I can't think of any times where we don't pull that off. It just, sometimes it takes an education, but we're able to pull that off. There are things that need to be considered, though, and we talked, Katie, in the previous boot camp, threw up an image that really detailed that we need to determine what project space we're operating on. There are those types of projects in which we may just be testing the efficacy of a sponsor's proprietary information. So there's going to be greater restrictions placed on publication. Normally, we'll preserve the right to publish on the methodologies and the testing protocols that we developed, or animal models or whatever, that we developed to complete that evaluation project. Granting, the 30-day right to review is the normal tack that we take. It could be longer. If we get too much longer than a total of 6 months, that's where the IRS starts stepping back in, claiming that that's really not freely publishing, if you will, and it will affect the export control issues when we start getting close to 6 months. As that previous contract clause indicated, we need to look at definitions really carefully in the ownership sections of the contracts. Especially with data or results, those types of considerations. And we must avoid including sponsors' confidential information in any publications without their prior written approval. Normally, it just doesn't happen. But it has happened at K-State. I did get a phone call one time that there was on a website a release of confidential information. It's been years ago, but they're very clear in the confidentiality agreements how we're to manage that expectation. So we've got to be careful in that area. And then Zoetis, our guest today, can relate to there will be delays needed in publications where it might be, we are a single site of a multi-site trial, and normally they don't like each site to publish data independently. They may want to wait till the data is aggregated. So confidentiality provisions, for the parties to feel good about exchanging confidential information, we need to build a foundation of trust, stewardship, that does place burdens on both parties. A party disclosing confidential information is, in fact, taking a leap of faith that their business asset or their pre-competitive information will be protected. There must be a deliberate plan to avoid any form of disclosure of that information. Receiving confidential information does establish a stewardship obligation on the recipient, and that obligation will normally continue past the termination or completion of the project. So we just need to be aware of those. We will try to negotiate for the least amount of time post-project completion. Normally 3 or 5 years, but for vaccine development, we may go into 10 years or more for a vaccine that's in the pipeline for development. So we just need to be aware of those terms and note that they have a continuing obligation. There is an expectation that we will not further distribute confidential information beyond those that have a need to know. So usually you'll see language in the contract that limits that to the folks that are under the faculty members' control or working on the project. And the burden involves that for us to be good stewards, we like for our companies to identify their confidential information in writing. Sometimes that's not possible. There may be project development discussions at the local pub after a conference, a national conference. And in those cases, if there's an oral, the oral discussion needs to, they need to identify that I'm about ready to disclose confidential information, and there should be an obligation that it'll be reduced to writing within a certain number of days. And that seems like it is a burden, but it helps us be better stewards of the expectations associated with preserving a partner's confidential information. We try to negotiate for reasonable timeframes for the expiration of confidentiality. We'll get some agreements in that really have indefinite expectations for all time and eternity. And being that a university is more or less a transient environment, we try to limit that to a discrete time period. And of course, we must not commingle that with our information. So good lab notebooks and good management and stewardship over our sponsors' confidential information is very important. So back to the varying perspectives. A university perspective might be all information can be freely disseminated except in limited, clearly defined cases. That might be the position a university would take, while a company would say all information is confidential, except in limited defined cases. So we need to find that balance and work out those expectations. It's done. Those are the perspectives we need to be aware of and really respect. And so we need to find the middle ground. We try to be transparent. As a state agency, we are subject to the Kansas Open Records Act, as is most public universities in every state. There are exemptions within those Open Records Act to business proprietary information owned, by a company, but there has to be a deliberate action to claim that exemption, we just want to be aware that we can't be forced to violate law, right? And so we will need the company's help to claim those exemptions if there's ever a request through the Kansas Open Records Act. It's similar to FOIA, the federal Open Records Act as well. And then an industry perspective is that the company would want to approve any release of data. And speaking of data, as we move into it, as we contemplate language and management of data, there's several questions that need to be asked so we can put it into context and perspective. I claim we're not a template university. We're very flexible. talking to one of our industry colleagues earlier that's in the audience, I know we try to be as flexible as we can within the constraints that we have to work under as a public university. But these are some of the questions. I'm not going to go through them. I'll let you read it on your own. But those are questions that we're going to look at just to do the test of reasonableness in comparing the expectations to what really should be applied given the context of the project. As I love doing the comparison, as we look at the university position, they may want to separate the types of data that might be accumulated in a project. That way there's not some of the data that may not need the controls that other data would require. So, the company would say, well, let's just combine all the types of data and apply the same controls. Universities like to talk about use, not ownership of that data. So they would we would rather grant the companies freedom to operate with that data. Companies aren't interested in paying for it again, so we would rather grant use rights than ownership rights. And a university or a company will come in with an initial desire to own the resulting data. Again, we would need to look at the research or the project space we're working in. If we're doing R&D, we're going to have to discuss. If we're testing and evaluating a company's proprietary information, it's an entirely different set of considerations that we would look at. Continuing with that, university is going to require that we define data if we're going to talk about ownership. So what I mean there is it might be data that is a part of the sponsor's identified confidential information, especially if you have preliminary, if it's a preliminary study on a formulation or a compound that the company has brought for us to test the efficacy on. Companies like to retain ownership of all raw data. We've had issues with that before as a public university. There's been statements that we need to retain custodianship of the raw data to defend the public record if there's ever a contest in regards to the efficacy of a particular technology. So sample contract verbiage that a university might like to see. Institution agrees that all data generated during the course of the study may be used by company for any purpose, including regulatory filings. That's a university position. A company might want to add to that without further remuneration, on the part of the company. And the company, such as that one that I referred to earlier, may come in with language that says that they agree that all data, inventions, and discoveries generated during the course of the study will be the property of the company. And so we would have to look at the project space. We would soften that a bit, quite a bit, for research and development, and ever so slightly if we were testing existing company-owned confidential information. So with that, I will close. I probably went over again. I'm told I talked too much, but as we transition to the panel, I'll open it up for any questions, and I hope I can give you a full-brain response instead of a half-brain response here. Any questions, or we'll keep moving? Any of our company reps that are in the audience, any comments? You doing good? Okay.
All right, thanks very much, Paul. Next, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker from Zoetis. There's the clicker. Wendy Elliott is the Director of Strategic Alliances in the livestock area at Zoetis, which is based in Florham Park, New Jersey. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of Saskatchewan and an MBA with a focus in agriculture from the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. Wendy has spent her entire career in animal health. holding positions in sales and marketing in both Canada and the United States, and she moved to her current role in August of 2011. Her responsibilities include the establishment of research collaborations to develop and commercialize new products and technologies to address the unmet needs of veterinarians and people who raise and care for livestock and companion animals. Wendy is here today to share with us some of her experience in the animal health research and tech transfer and commercialization arena, especially as it relates to academic partnerships, as well as some of the history of the Zoetis K-State relationship and where that's headed in the near future. So let's please give Wendy a warm K-State welcome.
Thank you very much. I would also like to introduce Dr. Mitch Blanding. Mitch is a K-State grad, and he is our Beef Tech Services Manager, and he's joined me for the session this afternoon. So we'll do a tag team if you have questions to cover both my position, but also Dr. Blanding's position. Paul, thank you very much for that introduction. I think that was a great overview of the contracts, and that certainly is a very key part of the relationships. And we know that there's differences, and each of us has objectives that we need to achieve, but I think certainly the experience that I've had representing Zoetis and the relationships with the K-State, both the researchers and the supporting industry contacts has been excellent, and I'm very proud to be here today, and I'm hoping that I can share some insight from an industry perspective and open for questions, and then we'll have some additional comments from the panel as well. We certainly agree that collaboration is required and is necessary to achieve our goals to discover, manufacture, and commercialize products. We are very committed to our own research program, but we also know that we need to collaborate with individuals like the researchers at Kansas State because of your skills and abilities and the capabilities that you have here, and it makes a great collaboration. One of the topics that I was asked to talk on was a little bit about the initial contact. How do you kind of introduce yourself and make your projects aware to us? And I guess my initial response to that was, do good research. Publish it, present it, file patents, work with your team, because that's critical. We are monitoring that all the time, attend conferences, and the one message that I'd love for you to take home is people work with people, and we're all working to strive to develop good research and bring commercial products to the U.S. and to the globe. I work predominantly on the food side, and so we really want to ensure that we provide good, safe food to the community. I can't stress enough the great resources that you have here at Kansas State with the foundation, the Institute for Commercialization, and I can't even keep all these acronyms straight. So Katie and Paul and Brett, who's on a cruise, they are phenomenal. Of all the people that I work with, it's always great to work with K-State. Again, we may come from different objectives, but really do try to collaborate and, as a history, have a number of projects that we've worked on, and I'm sure, and we're working on some right now, and the future will continue to have many more projects from that area. So you have a phenomenal resource here. Use them. They are some of the best in the country. And we're negotiating the master? No. No, I truly mean that. I truly do mean that. From a research perspective, we are looking for new technologies, always trying to understand what's going to be the next disease, and so that's very important for us, and this is where these collaborations really are beneficial. our goal, as I said, is to develop, manufacture, and commercialize products for the customers. And the more that we can work with you to help identify what are those opportunities, the more interested we are on from that perspective. So innovation is a word that is we use all the time, and also non-traditional. Really encourage you to think, look at other industries. What have they done? What are some of the technologies that we could potentially bring into our marketplace? When I look at relationships, there are many layers, and Paul talked a lot about the contracts, and I'll put those in kind of the industry, the business side of it. And that's a very important part of it. When we enter into an agreement, we plan for success. And it's very important that we do these agreements because that is the foundation of maybe start with an initial project, but often goes on to a longer-term relationship and ideally to a commercial product. And so there is a win-win created there. And so those are very critical. I'm sure as a researcher, you find sometimes very frustrating that we're going back and forth between legal and it takes some time, but that's one of the key learnings that we've had is that it's very important that we get some of those initial discussions early, as a lot of the things that Paul talked about, because that is the foundation and that really does set the stage as we move forward. The other, and this is probably a very obvious statement, but depending on the project, there may be a number of levels of review and approval that it needs to go through our organization, and also yours as well. So it takes some time, and I know we're all anxious to get the agreement signed, but again, it does take some time as we negotiate this, and it is very important to take that time and review that. I did want to spend a little bit of time on confidentiality. Paul, I think you set that up very good as to the importance of it, and realize that there are differences. From our perspective, there's a couple of key points that I wanted to bring up for confidentiality. A lot of it is driven, particularly in the early research, because of filing for patents. And there's certain regulations that we need to protect the information and file the appropriate papers and not share that information. And so that is one of our key considerations for that. And as an animal health company, patents are very important to us, and we really do try to create the patents and protect the patents. So that's why the confidentiality is very important to us. Also, depending on the stage of the project, to share that information prior to a launch is important. We don't want the marketplace to know before we're ready and have, if there's market preparation or manufacturing issues that we need to cover to move that forward. And as Zoetis is now a standalone company, we have become very familiar with a new term called material. And there is a legal definition, and really what that is that if information is shared that could potentially influence our share price, we need to disclose that. And I've really condensed that. So that is new to us, and so we need to be aware of that because if we, potentially are working on a project and it potentially could lead to a new therapeutic area or a large, revenue generation for us, if, the marketplace receives that information, we're publicly traded, so that could influence our share price. And so that's something that we are legally bound by as well. And so we'd love to have a product like that. So, but at the same time, if you're a co-developer, you will benefit from that as well. And so that's a very important, and like you say, that's a new term for us that we're certainly working on and trying to understand that. So it's a key area. So fully appreciate the need to publish, and I think you did an excellent job. Sharing back. There we go. Sharing the needs with that, but there are some legal and some strategic reasons why we ask for the things we do. But again, try to be flexible and work with a win-win situation, because we do want to establish a longer strategic partnership. The other area that you're probably more interested in is the researcher. Once and usually it actually starts with the researcher. You have collaborated, or you've done some research, you have an idea, you talk to one of our research team. And again, I want to stress, people do business with people. And it's very important, and I know we've had some excellent discussions on establishing what's the scope of work, what's the objectives, setting the milestones, the timelines, and that's the discussion between the researchers. Several different types of research, whether it be an early evaluation of a project, contract research, a sponsored research project, as you said, where it's maybe a little bit further in, we have a compound, you're doing validation on it, or also, and this is where Dr. Blanding certainly has worked extensively in this area as well, is we do a lot of work on the products once they're on the market. So applied research, as an example, the vaccines, how can we best use them in the field to help support the veterinarian to use the product in the best way forward. And so, those products are on the market. And so we really do have research in a number of areas and a number of people within the organization that collaborate from that perspective. Again, communication, critical, always is. We fully understand that research may not go exactly as the protocol was written, but the key thing is to have that discussion and keep the industry partner apprised of that information. Are you on timelines? What happened? I can't say that our projects all go perfectly. We experience that, but it's critical that we just are aware and keep that communication open. I guess the two take-home message that I want to have is, as an industry partner, we have had an excellent relationship with KSU, and certainly hope that we continue that. It's a great organization. We're very open to discussing opportunities, and hope that we can continue that as we move forward. The second piece is the support that you have here, the sponsored research, the Institute of Commercialization, the foundation, a fantastic team. Use them. They are excellent, and they are, from my perspective, a key group of people that we work with as well to build this relationship and hopefully help your career as research, and also support the commercialization of products and opportunities for our customers. So open to questions. And if you want to come up to the mic. Oh. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know if this is really a question for you, Wendy, or a question for the people here at K-State. So you were mentioning that you have to be careful about certain information being disclosed because it could affect share price. Can faculty actually then own any shares of the company that they're doing work for?
From my perspective, you would be a consumer. They're publicly traded. That would be a question if there's anything within K-State policy.
Looking for an attorney.
But the code is ZTS, New York Stock Exchange. No, from my perspective, you would be considered public.
what would come into play would be the university and the state conflict of interest policy. So you would have to look at what that value of those holdings are and disclose those. I mean, if you have own a substantial amount of stock in a company you're doing research there's the appearance of bias could affect the research outcomes if, from the outside parties looking in. And so you'd probably need a management plan to work through the appearances that would be associated with that. So, Mike.
Yeah, that actually came to home with me back in the late 1990s. I've always maintained a policy that I will not own individual stock in any company I do work with. If I have mutual funds, not much I can do about that. And in fact, in the late 1990s, I had a lot of Pfizer stock. And I started doing product development with Pfizer on a compound. And I immediately said, well, I'm going to sell my Pfizer stock, and I did. And I bought Cisco, and I lost a whole lot of money because the tech market crashed. But I could look at myself every day in the mirror. And so I've always maintained that, and we'll talk about a little bit later in the panel. Virtually everything I do is corporate-sponsored research. And I just don't do that. I've never thought that I could personally even manage that risk myself. And so that's been my own personal policy, that I just won't do that.
Good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Wendy, thank you very much. And now, next I want to ask our panelists to come forward and take their place at the table. We have with us today, in alphabetical order, Timothy Berg, who's a professor for the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Michael Dryden, who was just commenting on his successful stock trading strategies, for those of you who are watching online. Michael is the University Distinguished Professor of Parasitology in the Department of Diagnostic Medicine and Pathobiology in our College of Vet Med. And Michael Young is Professor and Head in the Department of Psychological Sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences. So what we'd like to do is allow each of the panelists to share a little bit about their experience in corporate relations as a member of the faculty. And then Wendy has agreed to moderate our discussion and cover issues such as building a foundation of trust that leads to strategic partnerships, how to communicate proactively and effectively, building some positive relationship models, and then looking at some best practices and lessons learned along the process. So without further ado, let me turn it over to the panel. And I guess I should ask if you want to, Michael Young, why don't we start with you in terms of your initial comments, and then we'll go to Tim Berg and Michael Dryden.
All righty, so I'm actually starting kind of at the opposite end, probably where some of the people out in the audience would be. That is very, very early in establishing a relationship with a company, and with a company that actually does not have a history of working with universities. So I'm the head of psych sciences. I've been here at K-State for about 2.5 years, and one of the things that I do as a department head is we have an alumni advisory council that comes in once a year. And that actually is what precipitated the relationship that I ended up establishing with the Hershey Company. So one of the years that the council was here, we actually had J.P. Bilbrey, who is the CEO of the Hershey Company, in to receive a distinguished alumnus award from our department. He actually has one college degree, and it's a K-State degree in psychology. And so we had invited him to actually come to our meeting, and I had some discussions with him during that, and he got a chance to understand a little bit more about some of the things going on here at K-State and in the department. And that kind of precipitated the beginning of the relationship. So he hooked me up with one of his vice presidents. I made a trip out to Hershey on my own dime just to kind of get a better understanding of what was going on out there. I invited that VP actually to come back and meet a lot of the people here at K-State. And it was at that point that we actually started discussing an initial proposal for a project. I'll tell you a little bit more about that probably a little bit later on in terms of what happened. But ultimately, the project went through, despite a number of different challenges that, again, I'll share with you later. And it actually came to a very, very successful conclusion. It was a nice little 5-month project completed at the end of December. one of the most fast and furious types of projects I'd ever had to work on, given again some of the things that were shared here regarding the corporate deadlines that we were up against. Although I was certainly on board, it was hard sometimes to get the students to recognize the importance of some of these deadlines. And then I actually gave a Skype presentation for them in February, and one of the surprising outcomes for me is I didn't realize that the day after I gave my presentation, the corporation made an announcement regarding a change in their corporate strategy. So the type of things that you end up doing for a company can have an immediate influence in a way that your normal research does not. I mean, we're lucky if we get somebody to cite our research, 2 or 3 years later after it's been published, at least in a slow-moving area like psychology. So been a very, very interesting relationship. And the nice thing is I was actually just on the phone on Monday with that VP again, and we're talking about a follow-up project. And at this point, they've gained enough faith and trust in me that they're asking me what I want to do next, rather than it being something that really is primarily initiated by the company.
So I'm Tim Berg. I've worked in industry for 9 years. I worked at a small company and at a corporate research center for a larger company. And then the past 10 years I've been at first Clemson University, now Kansas State University. And so I've seen projects from both sides, even one project from both sides. And so I start off by saying the information you already have gotten pretty much covers the good and the bad that can happen in these projects. That establishing expectations and monitoring those expectations are probably the most important thing that you can do. I guess I'll just, as my opening point though, one of the best things that can come out of this is maybe not the research or the product per se, but the exchange of ideas and training that you can get. That I think, looking back and thinking about the projects, when the industry people came to campus and we showed them our labs and took them to lunch and hosted seminars, or vice versa, when we went and saw their manufacturing or gave seminars at their plant, those were probably the most fun and most meaningful part of the exchange. And so if you can purposely build those into your collaboration model, I would recommend that. Maybe that includes budget, depending on how far the industry is away. But to purposely build that as part of the program and as beneficial to both the industry to better see what's going on at the university, and the university to really understand and find new problems in industry. I mean, really, that's what you're after, is if someone tells you a problem that they have, that's gold. That's the most valuable thing that they can actually give you is a problem to work on.
I'm Michael Dryden. I'm a veterinarian over in the Department of Diagnostic Medicine Pathobiology. My perspective is, I guess, a little bit different as well, because most of the work I do is directly with the pharmaceutical industry, the veterinary industry. And I actually initially got those interactions as a graduate student at Purdue. I had actually co-major professors there, and they generated a lot of research dollars, helping to develop and evaluate parasiticides. And so as part of that process, as graduate students, we were thrown right into that. So I really, a lot of my training came from that. And then I came to K-State in 1990, and I've been kind of doing that ever since. And again, the vast majority of my research is corporate-sponsored research. There's so many different things we could talk about up here, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is really the way this has worked well for me is I had a conversation with another individual almost 25 years ago now that used the term find uniqueness in a crowded marketplace. And that is, a lot of people do the same thing. Contract labs, everybody does the same thing over and over again. And so I came back to my lab and I said, we're not going to do anything like anybody else does it. We're going to take risks, we're going to stick our necks out, we're going to find different ways to do stuff. And we did that. And we had some spectacular failures along the way, but we also had some spectacular successes. And once you do that and you learn to do things differently, and I think you made a great comment earlier about going to meetings, presenting data, publishing data, and once we started presenting that information, basically unique procedures, different ways to evaluate these compounds, then everybody started coming up to me, and you start networking at these meetings. You start talking to people, and they start networking with you. Next thing you know, they're calling you up, they're coming, they're visiting K-State, and they're coming here. And after a while, you develop things that are so unique that you don't even have to seek it out, because they seek you out. And so I think it's one of the biggest things that we did here that has really established what we've done, is just find unique ways and novel ways of doing things and taking those risks. And sometimes these companies, if you talk to them about that ahead of time, they're willing to take those risks with you. But again, communication is paramount. It's key. Yeah, the expectation has got to be there all along the way, what the right expectations are. And communication, we have found, is when things go bad, don't wait a week. 2 minutes, you're on the phone, got an email, and you're dealing with these situations. I mean, you just deal with that immediately when that happens. We've clearly done that. But that's one of the things I think it's important, is try to find novel, unique ways to do things. And these companies will seek you out. And then if you maintain that confidentiality, you can work with multiple entities simultaneously. And as an example, right now, I've just submitted 2 publications, got 2 more going through review at companies, and writing another one. 4 different pharmaceutical companies simultaneously. I've got publications they're working on right now from 4 different competing. These are 4 different competing entities, okay, that are competing in the marketplace at the same time. So if you maintain that confidentiality as you go through this process, multiple entities will work with you as long as you're doing good work. Okay?
Tim, can you also address maybe how do you reach out to potential partners and identify opportunities?
I think we've described it already, that part of it is to have something unique that companies need. I think a lot of, one mistake might be to underestimate what goes on at a company in terms of corporate research and the skills and the abilities that they have. And so I think that you have to identify, what can you do that's different and unique, and then, your advertising, even though this seems passive, is through conferences. But you can be a little bit more proactive at these conferences and, find out who's there from companies that you're interested in and start a dialogue with them. But it may be a longer than one conference. You might have to develop a relationship. And so I think that's what I would say, is that you have to develop a relationship with someone that's in your technical field and understand, kind of what they're looking for, but also selling to them your abilities and skills and your unique proposition.
Michael, you work in a slightly different area. Do you have a different approach?
Well, I think in our particular case, because it was coming from, really it was being initiated by an alum who seemed to really just want to find some kind of a relationship with K-State. We went into the project really having no idea what we might end up being able to do together. I don't think they had a good, strong feeling of what it is that, the department was doing. We just happened to have somebody who was a willing partner to try to make something happen. I think through this, we've gained a much greater understanding of what the company's needs are, what it is that the Psych Sciences Department can actually bring to the table. I'll actually speak to another issue, if you don't mind, Wendy, and that is that I have had a lot of experience in the past actually doing federal grants, National Science Foundation, National Institute for Drug Abuse, working with the DOD. This was a very, very different experience. Number one, the money turned out to be surprisingly easy to obtain for this first small grant. But I had a degree of micromanagement throughout the process that I had never experienced before. Whenever you do a federal grant, you write this grant. It's going to be, 3, 4, 5 years long. You send it off. It's approved or it's not approved. If it's approved, you send in a report, once a year. And you kind of work at it at your own pace, and you kind of expect towards the end you're going to ask for a 1-year no-cost extension. We all know that. Doesn't work that way when we're working with a company. The project is supposed to be getting started, and because we hadn't really had a relationship with Hershey before, we were working through things like the legal issues, the confidentiality agreements. All of that was taking a lot longer than I had planned. I had originally planned on a year-long project, which ultimately they needed to have it done by the end of the calendar year, not the academic year. So it was turning into a 5-month project. I was working very closely with Katie, trying to be able to get everything lined up. And finally, I just started the project without having any money because we couldn't wait any longer, given the time frame that we were under. So I just had to have some faith that everything would work itself out. And once things started getting worked out, there was also a lot more of, so why don't you try this in the experiment? Why don't you add this variable to the experiment? Why don't you add this survey to the experiment? Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. Again, I wasn't used to somebody actually watching over my shoulder like that. In the long run, I think it really turned out to be a great relationship. They learned, I think, as time went on, what it was that I really brought to the table and the skills that I had, and learned to have a lot more faith and trust in what it is that a university researcher can actually bring to the table. I think kind of a turning point for me is when the VP actually was in town, and I gave him a status report of what was going on, and he looked, and his response was not the one I expected. It was to pull out his wallet and say, I can write you out a few $1,000 check to be able to make this project happen sooner rather than December 30th. Like, that wasn't the answer I wanted. I did not accept the money. Like, it's going to take us a while. We're having a hard enough time meeting that original timeline. But so it was nice to see that kind of enthusiasm. But it was a very different experience for someone who was used to the pace of doing kind of your typical federal grant.
You have a question? Can you come to?
Thank you for sharing that. That's getting actually to the question I wanted to ask to the whole panel. Rather than share, what we should do, I would be interested in sharing, if you don't mind, some of the failures to learn from them, what not to do, which sometimes doesn't get discussed and can be just as important. Would you mind?
I'll start and see if you guys can top this. I think like I said, Paul did a good job of outlining what you should and shouldn't do, but over-promising is the easiest thing. You want this grant, you want to do this, and so, sometimes, and especially writing federal grants, you can be a little bit more imaginative of what you can do, and so I think defining the scope of work, and more importantly, who is going to do it. My expectation would be, if I had money, I could get the students to work on the project, and I could have other faculty that would be interested in the project. And so on one project that I had from industry, neither of those happened. I couldn't find the students, I couldn't find other faculty. That was really disappointing, in fact, that that they couldn't see that this was a gateway to bigger projects, but that's what it was. But even getting students, I thought if I had money, I'd have students. And so essentially I did this project myself at night, and we're involved antenna measurements in cars, and so we were spinning my Dodge Neon around in the empty parking lot at night, making antenna measurements on the tires of the car. And so I think that was probably my biggest failure, is underestimating how hard it is to get the right students at the right time, and possibly how hard it is to recruit others, faculty or even staff, into a project. So I'll offer that.
Yeah, I can offer a few. I'll limit to maybe 4 at this point. I think a lot of this, for me, was a learning process going through here, and not only me, but I think also grants and contracts we've learned over the years. I've probably given Paul a few headaches over the years, but that's okay. I think one of the first things is remember that, especially with the corporate structure, the data entry is a lot different. And we made a lot of mistakes early on. Particularly stuff I'm doing, a lot of it ends up being, it sometimes may be audited by the EPA or the FDA. Not only company auditors, but also we've had both the FDA and EPA come and audit our lab. So data entry, data collection is paramount. And we made mistakes early on in that process. And so everything we do now has SOPs. There's not a procedure that's done in my lab that doesn't have a written SOP. Everything. I mean, I'm talking about even how we mix up a sugar solution. There's an SOP for everything. And so I think making sure you have that stuff up front is really, really important. And if you don't have it, then you're in trouble when the FDA comes in and they want to, we had an EPA audit a couple of years ago, and they wanted to audit 3 studies that we'd done 5, 6, and 7 years previously. And so having that data, be able to produce that data, have it stored in a safe, secure location, in a safe, that we can pull it out, provide it to them, and that's big. And we made mistakes early on with that. I think that's a biggie. The other thing is training. Our workforce is often students, be that undergraduate, in my case, vet students or graduate students. We don't have the opportunity to have a large workforce like that have at an SRO. That's some kind of research company out there. You just got to train well, and you got to document that training. And so training is key. And in my case, I've got a Vicky. Okay, that's my technician, Vicki Smith. She does that for me, and I made a note early. Everybody's lab needs a Vicki, okay, who oversees that stuff. So training is really crucial in that standpoint. Communication. I mentioned this earlier, we've made errors in communication. Something goes wrong. Something doesn't turn out the way it's supposed to. Instantaneously, immediately communicate that information. Okay. I often, and that's really, really important. And then I'm going to go back. And part of the training, there's another thing that happens, especially in this corporate world, and I think it surprised a lot of people, the rigor of the science that goes on in this situation. I'm a much better scientist for doing what I've done in the corporate world. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things I tell the students all the time, from a training standpoint, you drop a dish, you make a mistake, something happens. I can deal with that. I can write a steady deviation. I can have in a manuscript that, both been 8 animals, we only had 7 animals data collection that day, whatever it is. But when you put down it's a 25, I got to know it's a 25. Okay? I can't deal with data that is in a sense falsified. Can't. So as part of that training, that has got to be explicit, because we're often dealing in our laboratories with young people. Okay? And these young people, they want to look good to us. We're their professors. They want to look good, and mistakes happen. Yes, things happen. Okay, and they need to know that when things do go wrong, we'll accept it as long as they tell us. And then that was and so that's part of that training process. I think that has to be explicit in that process, because again, I'm talking about things that have gone wrong for us. Okay, I've got to know, like I said, you've got to know when somebody's entering data and they put down a 25, that's really a 25. You just got to know that, and you've got to make sure they understand that if they break something, they mess something up, they have the freedom and they feel comfortable in letting you know that happened. Okay, and so we're very explicit in that standpoint, and. That's good enough for now. Those are some of the mistakes we've made. I don't know if that helps.
Michael, any additional comments?
I guess probably I would echo a couple of things that Tim and Michael were sharing. I mean, maybe I was just a little naive whenever I walked in, but I knew what I was doing when I started out the relationship with Hershey. I also kind of, in one sense, put myself on the line and had to make myself available, because when they started talking about shortening the length of the project from the original year to 5 months, I didn't have the personnel that was available. I didn't have the people who were trained in to be able to do that. I had one graduate student who was available to be able to do it and had the skills. The undergraduates, I could train them in, that was not the problem, but I didn't have a second graduate student to get the project done in half the time. So what we did is we did a little renegotiation of the contract and bought out of my research time, so that I would be the one who would be up late at night and working through Thanksgiving break and through Christmas break, trying to be able to make that December 30th deadline to deliver on the project. I did that actually knowing that going in. It was obviously a difficult thing to do, and my wife told me don't do it again. But and I think the other probably, I don't know if this is so much a mistake or not, but I feel like this is something I've got to work on in terms of getting the company to understand the differences in the culture here at a university, and that is that students are not final products. They are in formation. And so the nice thing is they're really, really cheap. So, but it may take me twice as long to do something that you're used to going to a, private company and having it done in 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to take some time for me to actually train the students in, make sure they understand, everything that needs to be done, they understand the appropriate protocols, et cetera, et cetera. You're not dealing with somebody who already has been trained in. So I'm trying to make sure, that's one of the things that I'm working on as I move forward, is kind of that managing the expectations on the part of the company regarding what they can really expect out of students who are working on this. It's not that they're going to do inferior work, because these are really, really bright people. It's just it's going to take them some more time, and partly it's going to take more time because I am a little bit paranoid whenever it comes to my science, and I'm really going to be watching very closely in terms of what it is that they're doing to make sure that it is being done right.
Wendy, have you made any mistakes in your interactions with academia?
I'll call it a learning experience. I think the communication goes two ways. And on one project, we did not follow up with the researcher, and the student actually left, and the project wasn't being worked on. We were under the assumption that the project was moving along as expected, and then when because what we try to do, and I guess the key learning is the communications on a timely, whether it be quarterly or with the timeline when a milestone is to be reached, but to follow up and just ensure that the project is moving as expected. Because it's cost us, it's actually been 18 months, so it's almost double the time of the project. Fortunately, that has not been a key direct project that's been advanced. It was more of a exploratory project. So, but that would be the bigger concern. And I think once it's assigned, we really do try to follow up, and that's certainly something that I've increased my role, and I would be kind of secondary to the researcher to follow up on that. But again, the communication is important, but that's a two-way area to move on. Do we have the ability to take questions from the other sites?
Oh, yes, we do. And in fact,
While we're waiting on that, Wendy, I'm Doug Crithers. I'm with Marielle, and I'm the Director of Applied Research and Publications. So I have a role in my company similar to what Wendy does with hers. And I've been doing it for about 13 years. I've known Paul via email for a lot of years, and I just an observation here on the discussion thus far. They're talking about. I don't want people that are watching this to be trapped by the unique and novel thing. I really wish I'd been the one that discovered jack-o'-lantern lawn bags, the orange ones, because that would be unique and novel. I think that a big thing, and Mike is a perfect example of this, is that he's open, he listens, he's engaged, and he observes. And when we think about that, think about the going to the meetings, the association events. You want to be organizationally involved. We're all really very busy. We're all very busy. And like Wendy, in my company, I'm an N of one. So I basically do all of the post-marketing research that's done in companion animal, and I even help out the large animal group, and every once in a while I'll even help out R&D. At the same time that I'm doing that, I'm also the editor of the American Heartworm Society, and I'm also the Secretary-Treasurer of the American Association of Veterinary Parasitologists. So in that position, it puts you or in those positions, it puts you in the position that you can actually hear what's going on. You can be in on the cutting edge. You don't need to be, I don't think of it as constrained. I was actually raised at a university myself. My parents were on the faculty at Iowa State. And so I know how the university environment works. But every opportunity that you can do for outreach actually creates opportunity for you as a researcher. And that's the exciting thing. That's the thing that you don't have to come up with the latest, greatest pumpkin bag. You can come up with some better way to make a manufacturing line run or improve the quality control in a system. All right? Thanks.
And maybe to add to that, not every project is going to be a research project. That we've had a lot of what I would call projects that are student training projects, sponsorship of senior design, that are the point of creating a collaboration, but the companies, they have different motives. They want to access to students. Some of them are just altruistic that want to support local community, the university. And then there's the obvious research for business needs. And so, you want to scan all of those possible motives for different opportunities. And so everything's not necessarily a big research thing. We've had a lot of fun projects with senior design where companies have sponsored projects or just given us money for students to work on projects.
And there can be other additional things that occur as well, since you mentioned that, is that by interacting at these various meetings, these various corporations, one of the things, again, being aware, we saw that there was a need within the pharmaceutical industry for advanced training of the veterinary sales forces of all these companies. And so we actually developed a course here. We actually jokingly call it Wildcat Parasitology. But it is a small animal clinical parasitology training program that basically immerses technical service veterinarians in industry in a week-long 35-hour accredited hour course. And we've now had 117 industrial veterinarians from all over the world come through this course. And we just immerse them in an educational process. Of course, they pay to be here, and that money's been used very well over in the vet school. But by seeing the need, by being out there and networking, going to these meetings, talking to these people, you see that need, what's out there. And so we were able to provide that additional, you look at it, we're a land-grant university, we have research, teaching and service. And so obviously providing that additional, education, continuing education, if you will, was part of that mission. So it allowed us to do something we would have never even thought about before. So there can be, like I said, a lot more than just that actual research project that can come from these relationships. That can be, beneficial not only to us, the university, but to society as a whole.
Dr. Renter, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you want to talk about the new core project?
We actually were asked to do a class based on, that we were there working with this company, and they said we need somebody to train our engineers and to plan on control systems. Could you develop a course for us? And,
Perfect.
yeah, so we made a short course, and they pay.
Yeah, they pay. They pay.
Good. Okay.
You want me to talk about how that evolved?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'm David Renner. I'm in the College of Vet Med. I had the pleasure to have lunch today with Wendy, so we were talking about this. We recently established a Center of Excellence, Center for Outcomes Research and Education, and part of that development was in collaboration with Zoetis, the company that Wendy's from. And, how that developed, again, it was about relationships, communication, seeing the needs, not only for the research. There is the E on the core, the education piece. Like Dr. Dryden said, we've talked about how that education can be done in collaboration with industry as well. But when people have asked me, how did you identify that Zoetis and your center idea would work together? It really was an evolution of that development of a relationship, working together. I've worked with Wendy and others in Zoetis for several years on different levels and different projects. And we realized, sort of my vision and our group at K-State's vision of what we wanted to do in terms of a center of excellence actually lined up with what their outcomes research group, which is part of the company, one of their, pie in the sky ideas, so to speak, right? So we said, hey, we're both trying to go the same direction. We can partner here and get it done. I mean, that's the long and the short of it.
Yeah, and that was just announced in the last month or so?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's, we've talked about some of the different, whether it be, initiating educational programs, small research projects, but it's really a small industry, and it's people doing business with people, and how can we collaborate and build those sustaining partnerships as we move forward. And people may move, from one company to another, or one institution to another, but it really is all working together in collaboration. Thank you, Dave. Were there questions from
Right. I'll just announce again for the people who are watching online, you can join the conversation at rmpotter@ksu.edu or Twitter at K-State Corporate, hashtag KSU Industry BC, and I believe they'll put the screen up, that screen up for the for those who are joining us online. I don't have any questions from them yet, but I do have a question with regard to when it comes to developing the confidentiality and disclosure agreements. I know that in some cases, a corporation may send something to a faculty member to sign, and if a faculty member doesn't know any better, then that might happen.
Yes, I did that, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Mike? And then Wendy, maybe talk a little bit about the process of going through that negotiation process in coming to a final agreement on the confidentiality and the non-disclosure agreements.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it was very early in the relationship. We had no projects or anything lined up, and they wanted to bring me out to Hershey for a visit, and they required that I sign a CDA before I even went out for a visit. We had no project or anything in place. Like, okay, sure, sign this. Figured there was nothing on the line. It was only later, whenever I contacted Richard as the relationship was moving along, that I discovered I probably shouldn't have signed a CDA at that particular point. So that's one of those things that we learned more when we then moved into the project, and they were then asking all the students to sign CDAs, and fortunately I then knew the people to actually get in touch with to ensure that it was going to be the type of agreement that was going to be conducive to the successful product of the research from the university perspective.
Well, I've learned a long time ago that I just don't get involved in that. Once those things pop in my inbox, and they're all coming to your inbox now by email, all these, I just forward them on to, we have our own grants office over there, and then they forward them across campus, whatever. So, and then a company calls me and said, what's going on between this and this and this? I go, I'm not involved. Talk to somebody else. I don't want to get involved. I just, I let the lawyers duke it out, and then when they're done, then I'm fine. But yeah, I think we all made the mistakes early on. I probably signed, early 90s, probably signed one I probably shouldn't have signed. But that's not how we operate at this point. We just, they come on my inbox, and I just immediately forward that on. And we have several people in our grants office over in the vet school, and then they get them and they forward them across to someone in your office, and then we go from there. So I know those can be interesting sometimes. We just went through some fun hoops with Marielle on a couple. But I let them work it out. And I think that's a big thing. Let the lawyers work it out. And when they're done, then we can go forward.
Yeah, good advice.
You probably need to understand what the agreement is, though, at the end.
Yeah,
That,
I read them. I do read them.
Yes.
I do read them.
I think the misperception probably is that every communication between you and your collaborator is covered. That you have to be careful to identify what really is secret in the communications. And so it's not just a blanket.
Michael, you did mention that you have agreements with competing companies going on at the same time.
Yes.
Any insight about how to handle those conflicts of interests? What needs to be disclosed? What doesn't need to be disclosed? And how to go about it?
That's a good question. I think my position is a little bit unique because they all know that I do this. Because I'm constantly publishing, studies sponsored by multiple companies, and that's another thing from publication process. There's always got to be that conflict of interest, that acknowledgement within that publication. That acknowledgement at the beginning of any title slide in any meeting presentation that's sponsored by such and such, funded in part by. That's always got to be there. So in my situation, it's a little bit different because they all know that I'm doing this, and so I guess I don't. I guess if you're starting out, you'd want to make sure that they all knew that. But since I've been doing this a long time and this has evolved, every company knows that I'm evaluating stuff for everybody else. The key is, and I'll be honest with you, is maintaining that confidentiality. That becomes down to you as an individual and your ability to compartmentalize that information and make sure the information is not shared across. And at times it's a mental battle. It truly is. And not only between companies, Because there have been a multitude of projects that I have done for a group like, whether it's, Zoetis and formerly Pfizer or Mary L. here, that there are only certain people in the company they want me to talk to. That a representative from that company may come in and have no idea that project's even going on, okay? Because they don't want that sales representative to know what's happening, or a field service veterinarian know that's happening. So it's up here, and you've really got to make sure that you think about that and within that circle. So I would say that literally one of the most toughest things that I've had to do over the last 25 years is to make sure I don't violate that confidentiality, not even between companies. It's even within a company. And you just got to make sure that in that communication, when you're dealing with that, that company, that is, that you understand where those boundaries are at. And it's that communication, it goes back to that relationship of communication. Because the last thing they want is a sales representative for that entity to know about something before it actually is something, and they're pre-selling something, and then the FDA comes down on them like a hammer, okay? And so, that actually may be one of the most tricky things that I've ever had to deal with is that. But again, I think it goes back to you as an individual have got to make sure you understand that. And in my lab, there's, if you want to call it an edict, there's nobody below me who talks about anything, period, okay? The technicians, I got 3 technicians, they don't talk to nobody. Students, they talk to nobody, okay? And that goes back to errors, okay? Facebook, Twitter, okay? We have a field operation, we actually do studies in Tampa every summer, okay? Where we're down there evaluating actually flea products in people's homes. We've been doing this for a long time. It's one of those unique things. Nobody else on the planet does this. We actually had some students one time down there on Twitter talking about what's going on. And it goes back to, can't be doing that, okay? And it's bringing the hammer down, okay? Facebook, things like that. Pictures of, I'm at somebody, here's a picture of this animal. Can't be doing that stuff. So it goes back to that education, that training, that kind of stuff. So yeah, you really got to maintain tight control on that stuff.
Paul, any comments about that from the office?
It comes back to the stewardship obligations there, and also looking at the project space, with what Dr. Dryden is referring to are more sensitive projects than maybe you're doing in your routine, research and development project. These are, he's looking at testing the efficacy of existing proprietary information owned by a sponsor, and you never know what disclosure on Facebook could jeopardize the track that is on, on the way to commercialization. But, in regards to my office has a contractual perspective. We really are not part of the management of an implementation of those requirements. We're not there. I only get involved, as I referred to in my talk. I was notified that you have a faculty member that just published confidential information in one of the field days events. That includes our confidential information. It needs to be pulled down. So I'm kind of a portal to pass that information on. And I actually took a role of kind of mitigating the damage from that in regards to the relationship management. But we're not a part of managing those expectations. We just try to set it up early so the expectations are balanced with the context of the projects that's going on. So we'll look at the project space to determine what levels of control are needed. So.
But these are legal agreements, so technically there could be a legal challenge if it was severe enough, correct?
Yeah, if we didn't have as close a relationship.
Well, that's, yeah, but.
But yeah, it does.
Don't push us.
Point taken. But yeah, the point that Wendy's making is, any time that we breach those obligations, there is the potential there for damages, and so that's why I didn't put up the liability contractual consideration or indemnification or any of those kinds of of issues. But yeah, we have no motivation to tarnish that relationship. So it's really onto it's the faculty members and your lab that's out there interacting. You have the information. And so we establish what seem reasonable expectations within the contract. Then it's up to your team to manage that relationship with the company. And so, yeah, the worst thing could happen is we breach those fiduciary responsibilities.
Oh, yeah, if you do that, you can be done.
Professionally.
Professionally. They're not coming back.
Yeah.
On the other,
Basically, you're talking about while the study was going on, too.
Right.
You know, after the study's concluded, the companies will go ahead and work with them on, here's what we'll, publish, or here's the good data to go ahead and share, et cetera. One of the things that Mike didn't hit in his answer to the question was basically the justification for how he can do what he does. And really what we're looking at here are the big 3 C's. He's competent, he's confident, and he's credible. If he loses any one of those things, his value to us diminishes dramatically. And so that's why he works so hard, and he's very good at it, but he works very hard in maintaining that confidentiality, that competency, and he's always science-based. Every single discussion that he has, he'll go ahead and refer back to studies that he has personally done or studies that have been published that he actually believes in. Just remember, because just because it's been published doesn't mean it's actually fact. You have to actually be critical of any publications yourself. He'll look back at publications that he believes in and believes that they're solid, scientific, and justified, and he'll answer and address all questions on that basis. So he's not just shooting from the hip. And so he maintains that competency, that confidence, and that credibility. He's confident because he's got those other 2 C's behind him.
I would say an NDA is not going to bring trust to a relationship. That you shouldn't tell, as a researcher, I mean, we've talked about it from the company side, their information, but as a researcher, you have things that you probably shouldn't tell that, that it's not a blanket that they have to honor it, essentially, because the enforcement is through us as a university hiring a lawyer to try and get back the damages from you telling somebody your secret. I just don't see that happening except in an extraordinary case, and so you have to manage what you're putting into the relationship, that how much do you trust them, and is this necessary to this project? Because once it's out there, you probably are not really going to be protected in a legal sense, unless K-State wants to hire a lawyer to sue General Electric. I mean, does that even seem like a feasible scenario to you? It's not.
I just want to have kind of one comment. There's something that you were mentioning that I think I've noticed it was really affecting me whenever I was reporting on the results of the project. One of the things we talk about a lot in science is this statistically significant? Well, for me, it was recognizing I need to go beyond statistical significance and to find out what is actually of importance to the company. If this is not a large effect that I think is really going to be affecting consumer behavior in my particular case, I may not actually want to include that in the final report and talk a whole lot about it. And if I'm going to include it, I personally would downplay it, because I don't want them to be making decisions based upon some small little effect that occurred that is statistically significant, that ultimately is not really going to help out the company.
That's a really good point, is that, even in a lot of stuff that I do, that we published, well over 100 of these types of studies over the years, is that, you have your data. But one of the things that I always insist upon is that in any manuscript is I write the discussion. I don't want that entity, whatever entity it is, to write the discussion of what the meaning of that information is, okay? And that goes back to statistical significance and what is, in my realm, biologically significant. And so that's really, really important. And then, you made a comment earlier about that publication of information. In every situation I've ever done, and I think it's great that K-State doesn't give up the publication rights. I think that's phenomenal. We don't give that up. But I always allow the sponsor to review that information, that manuscript, to provide comments. Now, I don't always accept those comments. Doug's looking over there. I don't always accept those comments and edits, but I clearly give them the opportunity to review the manuscript, suggest edits for the manuscript, provide comments to manuscripts. Sometimes, there's very, very bright people working in the various levels of these industries. Sometimes 5 or 6 different people are looking at that manuscript, and it comes back to me and go, this is a lot better now than what it was when I sent it to them, okay? And they provide a lot of input. Now, I don't always accept that, but clearly give them the opportunity, because, you would hope this isn't a one-time shot. You're just hoping that they're not coming in and giving you a one-time grant and they're gone. You want to build a relationship, okay? Now, obviously, they understand we're going to maintain rights to publish that information, okay? But you clearly want to give them the ability to look at that, provide suggestions, and at least see what's potentially going to come down the road. Because potentially, they may have to mitigate damage, depending on how this looks. But clearly, if we're going to develop long-term relationships, we've got to maintain that line of communication down the road. But yeah, we're not giving up rights to publish stuff. That's got to be our call. I'm sure Paul agrees with that. Yeah. Now, have there been times that we haven't published stuff? Yes. Okay. Preliminary trials, drug didn't work. It never gets submitted for approval to the FDA. I'm not going to publish on data on a product that never going to exist. We've done that, and we've taken the money, we got the money, and we moved on because, no veterinarian wants to read about a drug that is never going to exist. We've clearly done that. We've delayed publications. Things have happened, and this isn't what we expected. And then we've gone back and gotten additional funding from those companies to try to figure out what's going on, and ultimately the publication comes down the road because we got to find answers. And so preliminary publications sometimes, they're meaningless unless you can figure this out. And so you work through that relationship, and you go, okay, we need to figure out why things didn't go the way they did, and they've given you additional money, and you work down the road, and then you get a publication down the road now that you've refined and figured out exactly why things went wrong. So have I decided that I'm not going to publish today? Clearly I've done that as we move forward. We've also delayed publications on stuff because the product's not approved yet. And that's not in everybody's best interest that we release that data before we get a product on the market, okay? Because then, they lose their competitive advantage, doesn't work good for us, and we've lost that relationship. So we delay a little bit. And nothing wrong with that. We're going to publish it. We're just going to wait a little while so the timing is more appropriate and they don't lose that competitive advantage. So those are the kind of decisions that you're going to make in a relationship. But you're not going to hide data. You're not going to show things out there that are bad. Particularly from a toxicological standpoint, we have an adage in veterinary medicine: above all, do no harm. And clearly, I'm never going to withhold publication of anything that's going to hurt anything from that standpoint. So, you're going to make ethical decisions, okay, in that relationship, but never give up our right to publish that information ultimately. I don't know, Paul, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm going to follow up. I'm going to put our industry colleagues on the spot here and follow up with your comments. We had a company approach us early to really validate an early stage. I don't know if it was a formulation or what it was, but the language in the contract said that we would be allowed to publish if the results were favorable to their project, would not be allowed to publish if it was unfavorable results. Is that something, how do you reconcile that within your respective companies? You would love to ask for that, right?
We would never ask for that.
Yeah.
Again, to the point of, especially if it's, if it's harm or information, again, integrity. We want to be here in the next 60 years. So, no, we do not make publication decisions based on the outcome of the study.
Yes, we operate the same way. It's still, the 3 C's apply to us too, because if we don't maintain our credibility and our competence and our confidence in ourselves and our products, and if in fact you're going to do a study and it's going to turn sour, like Mike just mentioned, you want to go ahead and find out what happened. If it's an unexpected result, you want to go ahead and look at your methodology. One thing that's been kind of fun in the collaboration that Mike and I have had over the years was looking at different avenues and finding out different information about something we thought we already knew everything about: fleas.
Yep.
So, basically what you have to do, and this kind of goes back to what I said initially about looking for opportunities. Look for opportunities, create opportunities, and then engage on those opportunities.
That ethical standard is real important because there are 5 or 6 companies that I work with regularly, and there are those that I don't. And I'm not naming any names today. I'm not going to do that. But I've clearly had entities in my office over the last 25 years who've proposed study designs that clearly were designed, set up to make their product look better than a competitor. I mean, and if you know what you're doing, you can see that right away, and you go, yeah, those are deal breakers. I mean, they're instantaneously deal breakers. So there are those pharmaceutical companies that I really enjoy working with because they are science-based, and they truly are, and their integrity is everything to them. Not everybody's that way. And I will say that typically those are companies that are here today and gone tomorrow, quite frankly. So the big companies, Novartis is now Elanco, but anyway, Pfizer, Zoetis, the Mariels, and the Mercks of the world, things like that. Those companies, they are science-based, and I think that often surprises people where that comes from. Because I remember the era when corporate money was not as green as other money. Okay, picture when I first came to K-State coming from Purdue. There were faculty members in my department that didn't think corporate money was as green, if you will, as NIH or USDA or whatever it is kind of funding. I think those days are gone, quite frankly. And I think a lot of us who've learned over the years that we can do remarkable high levels of science, great science, and make remarkable changes and advancements in whatever industry we're in, working with these corporations. Every bit as good and sometimes more rapidly than we can with some of these other types of funding outlets. So, but you've got to maintain that integrity. It's everything. Okay, call it the gut test or whatever it is. Okay, if it don't feel right, you don't do it. I mean, so I don't know how else to say that, but you've got to maintain that integrity every step of the way.
I want to actually bring up, you have a question? Go ahead.
Steve Bartle, Beef Cattle Institute. How are discoveries outside the scope of the project handled and should be handled?
Can you explain exactly what you say outside the scope of the project?
The project is defined, and because of something else you're doing or something, a lightning bolt, you learn something.
Unexpected result on a study?
An unexpected result that you as a researcher see, and it would not be part of the scope of the project. I think in Dr. Lowe's, the last slide, next to last slide had that in some of that language, but it's something that was related to the project, but it could be valuable, but it was not exactly part of the project. How, as a researcher, should you handle that?
Carefully.
Yes. That's a good word, carefully. A lot of stuff that I do, we have pretty detailed, extensive protocols, and literally sometimes 200 plus pages of data capture forms. If that information that's being generated during this project is in any way part of that protocol or ends up on a data capture form, okay, it's part of the project. Okay, if there is not a place that it actually is entered into that particular thing, depending on what it is, then you're going to handle that very carefully. We've made some pretty remarkable discoveries along the way doing that. So yeah, you're going to handle that I don't know how to say it, but carefully. I guess you have to know exactly what the specific instance would be, but I mean, clearly we did a project in Tampa in 2009 and got something out of that project that we clearly didn't anticipate. Clearly in the communication with the company, we divulged that, and that's been a major part of how we evaluate products ever since. Okay, and so so it I guess depends on what it is. Carefully, that's a good word. Carefully, yeah.
I'd just interject, if you run into a situation like that, first place that goes to Paul. I mean, if you have something, just go ahead and go ask for Paul, and he knows the lawyers, and go ahead and get a ruling internally, and it'll probably end up working through the lawyers, and it might end up working with the company lawyers too, but what they'll do is they'll come to an agreement. And so if you in fact, in your studies, you've actually discovered something off to the side that could be a really great benefit for Kansas State University, I know they'll fight for it. You know, there's no question about that.
And what we're looking at is, again, I keep using this term, the project space. What kind of a project are we involved with there? If so part of that evaluation process, if there was an unexpected result that's part of a strict protocol in regards to a testing and evaluation project, if I was the company, I'd be concerned of, okay, we have an unexpected result, and that we need to document that we didn't stray from the protocol. So sticking to that protocol is going to be very important in regards to the company documenting their processes, especially when in the later stages for drug approval. But some of the contract language we'll see in there, even on testing and evaluation projects, is, you know, we're really not involved in the inventive process. I don't know if I made up that word. I've used it for a few years, but, you know, we're normally not in that inventive process. But if an unexpected result pops up, you know, that's, you know, you're exactly right. That K-State would, and normally we will look at that contract language where that's a carve out from the IP expectations of the company. You know, they're not interested in us making any claims for the product that they've already brought to the collaboration. Research and development, that unexpected result, you know, was part of your intellect, and so, you know, it sounds obvious to me, again, without knowing the specific situation, that that would be qualify as, you know, in the patent law as the inventor. And so with our contracts and R&D, ownership follows inventorship. So, and it could be something that it's not even patentable, but you know, as our panel mentioned, I think our company collaborators would like to know about that. If it's, you know, so you just be careful. You know, see what you have. We have the K-SURF and KSUIC that can help you evaluate that unexpected result to see, is it a patentable subject matter, you know.
I'm going to try again.
Yeah.
If there's, you know, you're measuring A and B, and that's part of the protocol, and any relationship that between A and B certainly is part of the protocol. But if you're also, through other work, you'd measure C, and other research you've done, and somehow you measured C, and there you can see there's a relationship between A and C. You know, that would be outside the scope of the project, and that's kind of how
I would say I need to call a friend on that one.
Yeah, call Paul.
Because hopefully our thinking isn't just within the box. We got to get out of the box a little bit at times too.
Yep. I really don't know how to answer. I don't know how to answer that without specifics. I can't.
Yeah.
And again, I'll defer to Paul and his group. But
A good question. And
yeah, I don't have an answer.
I guess my kind of comment to that is that happens. And hopefully, you know, we've got a good relationship that we can have that discussion. I don't think either is, you know, wants to take advantage of the other partner. So it would be, again, you know, communication. This is what's happened. What does that mean? Is that covered in the current agreement? You know, yes, no, then what's the next step? But absolutely, when we, you know, come with a scope of work or an intention for a proposal or a project, you know, we do our best to outline this is what we expect will happen. It doesn't always work that way, but that's, at least from my perspective and kind of from Zoetis's perspective, that's why we take the effort to build these relationships so that we can continue to work. And a lot of good things come out of this because of the activities. And again, we're research-based. You're research-based. That's why we do research.
I want to bring up, I know you're getting towards the end, there's a larger issue that we haven't really touched on. And I know one of the things that if I were a faculty member sitting out there, there's always the question of how do you get started? And I mean, I mentioned, there was the situation that I had through one of our alums. But one of the things that I also did was whenever I made that initial trip out to Hershey, I thought, well, I'm not quite sure what I can really bring to that company. So I talked to some people over in the College of Business to see if there was anybody over there who might actually be able to bring some value to the company. And I had an assistant professor actually from the College of Business who joined me on the trip. And I thought that was going to be the project that they ended up funding. Ultimately, that one didn't happen. Whenever I brought the vice president in, I got in touch with Richard and said, Richard, are there other people on campus who might want to meet with this guy? Because maybe there are other projects that could be spawned. So I know we had to meet with not just people in College of Business, but people in statistics and math. They actually tried to hire a couple of interns out of the statistics department.
From agriculture?
Agricultural economics. Making sure in terms of building that relationship that we understand that the company isn't just interested in my department, they're interested in what it is that the university can actually bring to the table. And that creates opportunities for faculty who are out there who may not have that foot in the door that I had with the company. Now, ultimately, I think they really liked me and kept coming to me for a project, so I finally gave in and said, okay, I'll write up a proposal for you. As a department head, didn't have a whole lot of time to be able to do that. But I think it's really important for us to recognize, the larger needs of a company, and it's not just what, us as an individual laboratory can bring to the table, that there are a lot of resources here on campus that may be able to help out a company.
Did you want to make one more comment before we wrap the session up?
I just wanted, on the concept that you were discussing, having been in food animal in a former life, while you're trying to go ahead and discern A and B over here, if you invent a tool for handling cattle or doing something over here C, I view that as your own. If in fact you're looking at data points and looking at observations you might have seen previously, I think what that would do for you as an investigator is if you shared that information with the people that you're working with on a study, they're sitting there focused on A and B, it's your job to open their eyes to see. Not pun intended, by the way. You are university professors. You do have the capability. You have the intellect. You have the insights, and that's what this is all about: is sharing those insights to help make everybody better. And so, I think that and they can take it or leave it at that point. And if they don't take it, then you can go ahead and write your own paper on C. So they'll either work with you, and they probably certainly won't work against you on it.
And as the Grim Reaper, then what my question would be, do you owe any obligations to any other sponsor that's sponsoring that evaluation of C? And so we would want to look at that and see what obligations are owed to that other party so we can manage the relationship amongst all of our partners. So if C is funded by somebody else, we would have to take a look at that before we would have conversations with the sponsor on A and B. So.
Great. Well, we've got time for maybe one more question before I offer the panel the opportunity for any closing comments. Going once, going twice. To the panel, any closing comments as we wrap the session up?
I think it's hard to build new relationships. You have to be patient. That industry, the companies I worked with, their planning was at least a year out, and so they weren't going to fund any new projects even if you had a great idea this year. And so you have to be persistent and patient, though.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's important, persistent, patient, and then once they made the decision, they want the data yesterday.
You're right.
That's the other thing. Okay? They dragged their feet for a year, but once they made that decision, they want, then somebody wants to know, how come I don't have the data now? So you got to be prepared for that. I think that's, I've learned that over the year. You made a good comment earlier. How do you start this project, this process? And I think, we've mentioned this before, but, you're reading, whatever discipline you're reading the relevant information in the publications in the discipline you're in. You're out there going to the meetings. And what I still try to do today is I try to see what the issues are, the problems. And you got to look at your own discipline. And, mine's veterinary medicine and parasitology. What are the issues faced by the public at large, or whatever the situation is, and then basically sit back and try to dream up ideas of how we can solve those problems, okay? Whether that's with a specific compound, or whether that's a need that needs to be addressed, that whatever compound or project that is, it deals with that area. Maybe there's some basic science that we need to generate, and we've done a lot of that over the years. We've generated a lot of basic science that these companies have sponsored because ultimately it helps them understand the problem better. So what I often try to do is see what the problems are, pay attention to what's going on, and then go to, sometimes I'll go down the line, I'll go to company A, B, C, D, E until one of them pops, okay? And pitch these ideas, how we can solve a problem, and I have literally gone through 5 companies before I've got a hit on an idea. That's a good way to start. Knowing your discipline, knowing where the issues are and the problems are, proposing solutions, and then try to figure out a way that somebody in the company is going to go, maybe that's something we ought to have an answer to. Okay, and that's a really great way to start. And I still do it today, even though I've been doing this 25 years. I still do this all the time.
And one of the things that was really helpful to me in terms of starting the relationship with Hershey is that the vice president, when we were trying to come up with an idea that would work for the two of us, he set up an opportunity for me to have some phone conversations with the CEO of the company, who I knew, as well as the head of their R&D division, basically with one question: what's keeping you up late at night? Those are opportunities that where I can actually come in potentially with a solution to problems that they currently don't know how to solve, because they knew how to solve them, that wouldn't be keeping them up late at night.
Yep.
Great. Well, let's show our appreciation for the panel. We do have refreshments remaining for the folks that are here in Manhattan. Still haven't figured out how to do that virtually for those who are watching at your computers or in the satellite campuses. But opportunity to interact individually with our panelists. And then I want to also bring up our next session is developing and managing the outputs of your project, including some examples of projects that have gone awry, tips for avoiding 5-figure fines or worse. And this literally is an article in Bloomberg Business, Why the Professor Went to Prison. So you don't want to miss the April 9th session. Dr. Jim Geikema, Associate Vice President for Research here at K-State and President of the Kansas State University Research Foundation, as well as Teresa Landis from the Research Foundation, and Ken Williams from our Institute for Commercialization will be here to discuss those things. April 9th, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. It is not in this room. It will be in the banquet room A at the K-State Alumni Center, so that we can have a wine and cheese reception following that event. So we hope to see you there. Thanks for being here today, and please stick around for the reception and networking this afternoon.